So welcome back to Everything Marketplaces, where we talk with founders and leaders from some of today's top marketplaces. So this is episode 68, and it was a really great group chat that we just had with Gabe Luna-Ostaseski, who's a co-founder of Braintrust. So Braintrust is a freelancer services marketplace that's recently launched and is rethinking the future of work as a Web3 marketplace. It's backed by top investors like Pantera Capital, True Ventures, Multicoin Capital, and more. So part of the Braintrust, Gabe is also the co-founder of Modernize, which is a home services marketplace that scaled to be nationwide and was eventually acquired. To top that off, he's also an advisor and investor in 40 plus marketplaces like ClassPass and LendingHome. So this is a really insightful chat that we just had where we explored the shift from Web 2 to Web 3, how Braintrust has quickly become a leading Web 3 marketplace and network for freelancer services, what Web3 could look like for the future of marketplaces, and also had a really great Q&A for those that were on the chat. So I really enjoyed this conversation with Gabe, and I know you're going to find it a great watch until the end. So Gabe, welcome to the group chat, and really excited to have you join us here today for our first group chat exploring the world of Web3 marketplaces and networks. So in today's chat, as I kind of mentioned, I love to walk through the shift from Web 2 to Web 3, do a deep dive on Braintrust as a Web 3 marketplace that's rethinking the future of work. But maybe before we do, if you can start off by sharing a little bit more on your background, since you have some really incredible marketplace experience prior.
Yeah, so let's see. I've been unemployable since 18. So did my first company at 18, sold it at 21, and then immediately started a marketplace for home services, which at the time, I don't think we even called it a marketplace. We didn't even really know what that was. We're just like two people out of our garage. But essentially, we connected homeowners on one side with home service pros on the other side. I don't know that I would have done that if I actually knew how hard marketplaces were. But I was young and I was ambitious, and so got that company off the ground. I was the co-founder of that company. We scaled it up to be the largest privately held home services marketplace in the US. We did about 100 million in sales, and then sold it to a company called Quinn Street, who operates a bunch of different marketplaces. And then after about 2 weeks of like doing yoga and reading books and chilling out, my wife kicked me out of the house and was like, "You got to get out of here. You're driving me nuts." And so I started advising other two-sided marketplaces in Silicon Valley. I was involved in Thumbtack and Uber and Better Doctor, and then built a small venture fund around it. I was first like investing my own capital, and then built a small venture fund around it. And then invested and advised in 46 marketplaces across all different industries. And so I would say like seen on the front lines, seen them go big, seen them go home, and kind of everything in between. My path into like why Web3 marketplaces and like why this wild world of crypto is like, if you think marketplaces are complicated, like go down the crypto rabbit hole, and that will tickle your brain in a whole other way. What I saw was, hey, listen, these Web2 marketplaces basically all have the same fundamental flaw. They all rely on high fee extraction to build enterprise value for the shareholders. When you take 20, 30, 40% transactions, a few things happen. One, like your users start to hate you. And two, it creates a huge incentive for disintermediation. And it also, depending on the category, pushes large ongoing transactions off the network. So a good example of that is like, an example of Upwork is like when they're S1, when they went public, their average job size was $600. Like, why is that? Well, like, if you're paying 20 or 30% transactions, like anytime the job gets big enough, you're going to go off platform. And that really like defeats the whole purpose of a marketplace, which is creating a trusted place that provides escrow services, insurance, etc., for people to transact in a trusted way. And so again, like that's one fundamental flaw, which is this high fee extraction. It really kind of kills network effects, and like kills the community love. And then the second part, and you see this especially kind of in the gig economy, is listen, like these have been enormous wealth creation events for a very small number of people that like live in this little area called Silicon Valley. But especially in places like the gig economy, you know, these have been wealth extraction events for the supply side. So you see Uber drivers living out of their cars, you see Dashers, you know, sleeping out of their cars, and you see like 10 people that became decabillionaires. And I think that that's not sustainable. And so I think that these marketplaces that, like, for me, it was clear that if you were able to drop fees close to zero, you would align incentives. And if you were able to share value and governance, you would build a very, very strong network of users that had aligned incentives. I can obviously like deep dive into any of those topics, but
that's great. We definitely, had the right person on the group chat today, since you have some pretty incredible experience, prior, and then and now here with Braintrust. You did kind of cover, Web2. So like, what do you mean when you mention like Web3? So we can kind of get a good understanding of
yeah.
that.
So yeah, it's a great example. So all right, so let's like first cover like what the fundamental things of like Web2. So there's been these kind of like three core phases of marketplaces. Like, let's say that kind of the Web1 marketplace, and I would call that like the Wild West of Craigslist, right? Like it essentially brought aggregated supply and demand, and enabled like transactions to occur, but there was no escrow services. There was nothing that like, there was no payments, et cetera. So it was kind of it was a mess, right? What happened in Web 2 was basically these kind of core innovations that happened mainly with the mobile phone, which is this introduction of escrow, this introduction of payments and ratings and reviews and other trust mechanisms, right? And you see that kind of proliferate, and it basically formed that those core innovations formed the foundations for Uber and Thumbtack and all of these kind of Web 2 marketplaces that we see today. And that's been the predominant business model. Like, these have been the biggest wealth creation events of the last 10, 20 years. And so that I would say like that those are the fundamental kind of like innovations in Web 2, which is take a much larger fee out of the transaction, process the payment, provide escrow services, and basically take a 20 to 40% rake out of the transaction. And essentially raise billions of dollars of venture capital and just crank up the flywheel and essentially do that over and over and over again. The core innovations of like Web3 marketplaces would be, I'll say like for many projects, kind of like replacing that typical like ownership and governance structure of like a Delaware C corporation, essentially with a token, and giving that token away to the users that help build the network, and then letting those tokens essentially represent governance and owning and control. So I'll give you kind of like an example, like let's say a Upwork example. They're kind of like a Web 2 example. So they go and raise billions of dollars to go and like spend a bunch of AdWords and try to attract like supply and demand into their network. And then they take a 20 to 35% rake out of the transaction. And all of that goes to the shareholders of Upwork, right? In Braintrust, there is no equity. The sole unit of ownership and control and governance is the BTRST token. Now, we don't spend a penny on marketing. We never have and never will. We have this year, in our first 12 months, we'll do about $35 million of GSV and transactions with $0 in marketing spend. All of the clients and all of the talent come from talent and clients referring other talent and clients and earning BTRST for doing so. So it's this incredible tool to be able to kind of bootstrap network effects and cross the chasm that most marketplaces fail in, this kind of bootstrap phase of getting enough people to kind of show up in your sandbox and play. So that's like one of the core innovations, is essentially using the token to bootstrap network effects, and also to proportionally give ownership and control to the people that help drive the most value to the network. That's like kind of innovation number one. And then innovation number two is enabling governance to happen in the networks. So like, I'll pick on DoorDash here for an example. A couple of years back, DoorDash enabled tipping. and then they kept all the tips and they booked it as revenue, right? They essentially stole the money from the dashers. That would be impossible in the Braintrust network, because if you wanted to change the fee structure, you would have to put that out to a vote amongst the whole network. Anyone that owns a token can vote, and it's a one token, one vote system. So people would have to vote to essentially have fees stolen from them, which would never happen. And so that's kind of the second innovation, is essentially a real democracy in these networks, where it's egalitarian and people get to vote and control the networks. And then the third is essentially the fee structure. So if you're a user in this network, would you vote to have fees be really high on yourself? No. Like, why would you do that? And so our fees to talent are 0%. They pay a 0% rake. And so you can see how it could be a pretty attractive model, right? Like if you're coming from an incumbent Web2 marketplace, like you come to Braintrust, you pay 0% fees instead of 30%, and you actually get to earn BTRST for inviting your friends and inviting clients. And guess what? Like you get to own and control the network. Like those are pretty strong incentives to leave incumbent Web2 marketplaces and join Web3.
Yeah, that's a really great breakdown. So yeah, I appreciate it, and kind of breaking down the innovations, with Web3. So if we kind of go back to the, to the early days, like what's the founding story of Braintrust, and like how did you actually get it started as a Web3 marketplace?
Yeah, I'd love to take credit for this idea. What I have found historically is like I hitch my wagon to really, really smart entrepreneurs. So my friend Adam Jackson, he's a 4-time entrepreneur, 3 exits, 1 pre-IPO, most recently Doctor on Demand. So built a global or a US telemedicine app that leveraged kind of doctors and patients on both sides. Adam and I were both investing in crypto. He had started a hedge fund. I was investing off my own balance sheet. We were doing a bunch of due diligence. We were investing in deals together. And we're like, hey, like our marketplace minds, we're looking at crypto and being like, what do marketplaces do? Like they essentially bring together people to transact in a trusted way, and they balance supply and demand. And what if you could do that with software and tokens instead of doing it with, venture capital money and people pulling levers behind the scenes? And so we saw that like one of the most interesting applications of tokenization was essentially to build marketplaces and build networks. And Adam had this idea for a tokenized network and had done a bunch of diligence on it. He actually asked me over to like jam on it with him and talk about like, how would you bring this to market? And then he asked me to be an advisor, and I said no, but I'll co-found it with you. And I dropped everything I was doing at that point. I was like, this is the future. Like this is, after doing 45 marketplaces, like I knew where all the skeletons were buried, and I like saw the writing on the wall. And I saw the power of this basically a new technology of blockchain that enables a new business model, which is user ownership. And like that's a really fundamental shift, in the same way that like escrow and payments and ratings and reviews enabled Web2. I think this is this kind of fundamental shift that enables a brand new business model that will be very, very disruptive to the incumbent networks.
Awesome. That's a really great story. Yeah. So what were some of the biggest challenges that you faced early on? Because I'm sure there were quite a few.
Yeah. All right. So let me go in my rewind machine. I have a bunch of scar tissue around this one. So I would say that the first thing is that we did a bunch of customer development, right? So like we went out, our thesis was actually that when you drop the fees down to 0 for talent and 10% to clients, like you enable like actual enterprise transactions to happen on the network, which nobody in the labor marketplaces had really tapped yet. So we went and interviewed a bunch of enterprises, validated on that side, interviewed like probably 80 different freelancers to validate the business model. So we got a lot of confidence in the business model. And Adam and I like both had venture funds, right? And we had done pretty well off of our exits and stuff. So we could have actually just funded this thing ourselves, but we actually wanted to go and raise from some great VCs, I think as like signaling. So we went out to go and raise this, and we're like, we're going to be done with this in a week. Like, this is a slam dunk. We did 110 pitch meetings. And like, we're basically laughed out of Sandhill. Like, people literally said, if you want to start an Indian restaurant, we'll fund you. Like, if you want to start a women's shoe company, we'll fund you. Just don't do this. For a couple of reasons. One, it was like crypto winter, right? I don't know if you guys remember, like end of 2018. Like, basically, the investors were like, crypto's done. Like that happened in 2017. Like, this whole blockchain thing is just done. And also, like, the crypto people were like licking their wounds, and then all the marketplace people were like, why would you want to drop fees to zero and give away ownership and control? Like, that doesn't make any sense. So they weren't really thinking from first principles. They were reasoning by analogy of like the way that the world has worked. So we were going out to raise $3 million in the seed round. It was a brutal experience. We ended up actually like 2x oversubscribing, but it was, I think that was kind of the first time we like really ran into a big challenge. It was unexpected. I just thought, like, I saw it. It's like those things. All of you are like entrepreneurs. Like, you see a vision clear as day, and sometimes everyone else doesn't see it quite yet. And so that was, I think, the first challenge. The next challenge, I think, was like getting all of the enterprises to sign up, right? And what we found was that, like, talking about tokens to enterprises, especially in 2019, ended in a lot of like, we'll call you, don't call us conversations. And so it was a little bit hard, like, in the beginning, because a lot of these enterprises weren't doing remote work, freelance, and also like crypto. So it was a little weird for them. So it took a little while. And then and people were like kind of dipping their toes in the water. Like, they would put a couple roles on the platform, and then actually, like, then COVID and the lockdown happened. And then we were supposed to come out of stealth, I think, in March 20th of 2020, basically like the day that all the lockdowns happened. We ended up coming out of stealth in June of 2020, and we got 258 inbound leads in 1 month. And all of those enterprises that were dipping their toes in the water basically said, hey, the biggest barrier was this kind of like anachronistic thinking around butts and seats. And guess what? Like, game on. And so, like, these companies that were doing 1 or 2 roles put on 20 roles and 30 roles and 40 roles at a time onto the platform. And this thing just started growing organically. We were growing in 2020. We were growing sometimes upwards of 60% month over month, again, with no marketing spend. And we've continued that pace. So I think we were anticipating doing like $500,000 in our first, like, in that first 6 months. We did 3.5 million. We were anticipating doing 5 million. This year we'll do almost 40. So I think that, like, some of these things are like right business model, right time, and then there's also like luck and timing and a bunch of other things mixed in there.
Certainly, it seems like quite the journey so far. So there's a lot I want to jump into, but I realized we didn't really do like a kind of high level overview of what Braintrust actually is.
Oh yeah,
so
sure.
That might actually be helpful.
Yeah, so Braintrust is a decentralized talent network. So if you think, all of you are really familiar with the marketplace model, so essentially I'll say that the ask side of the marketplace, or the demand side of the marketplace, are clients that want to hire highly skilled technical talent, engineers, product managers, designers, folks like that. It started with like a lot of kind of SMB, and then it has grown up, and now we have 100 of the Fortune 1000 companies, NASA, Nestle, Porsche, all these big companies that essentially have an insatiable appetite for highly skilled technical talent, but yet are located in places like St. Louis and Omaha, Nebraska, where those people simply don't exist. So that's kind of like I'll say that that's the ask side, or the demand side. The other side is actually all of these highly skilled technical talent from around the world, ranging from, there's kind of like 4 or 5 categories that we're really deep into right now. Obviously, this model expands to all knowledge work categories, but you have to kind of start with a wedge and start with these highly skilled talent. So those are kind of the 2 sides of the marketplace. The way the business model works is we take 0% rake from the supply side or from the talent side. So they get to keep 100% of what they earn. All the rates and stuff are totally transparent. So there's no like black box, there's no markups, like all that kind of stuff. And then on the enterprise side, we take a flat 10% above the transaction. And essentially the network runs at a break even using that 10%. So we have, that's the basics of how the fee structure works. And then when I say it's a decentralized talent network, we actually have not a single engineer that is employed by Braintrust. There's actually 6 kind of like core teams that are actually building the Braintrust network. And then thousands and thousands of contributors like an open source project. So I think there's only about 20 core team members on Braintrust, yet we're a global network. So it's kind of just it's a totally new way of building a marketplace, which is basically raise the absolute minimum of venture capital that you can raise and decentralize as much as possible to the community and contributors around the world.
Awesome. That's very interesting. I know that's going to prompt quite a few questions here during the group Q&A. So I did want to touch on the concept of the kind of the token model and kind of building a network. So maybe you could share about that and kind of how you build like a durable network and kind of community with Braintrust.
Yeah. So when thinking about the token, so the first kind of fundamental things to understand is that it's a fixed supply token. So there's a finite amount of them. There's 250 million tokens that can ever be issued. And that's written into the code. And then there's allocations of those tokens for various activities within the network. So we sold, I think it was 22% of the tokens to top investors, Tiger Global, True Ventures, IDEO, Homebrew, kind of a who's who of investors there. Then there's an allocation for kind of the core team and core developers. And then actually, I think it's 54%, I can send around the actual token design, but around 54% is actually reserved for distributing to the people that actually help drive more clients and more talent to the network. So the way that the token works is that right now you can't buy it, you can only earn it. And you can earn it by doing activities that help the network grow. So what are those things? Like if you invite more engineers, you invite more designers, more product people, when those people start to transact in the network, you actually earn a percentage of what they transact paid out in the BTRST token, the native token of the network. So the idea is, hey, like anyone can show up and add value to the network and earn BTRST by doing so. Other ways that people can earn BTRST is actually peer-to-peer screening, right? So like traditionally in a Web2 marketplace, you'd hire an army of people that are doing vetting. In Braintrust, all of the screening is done peer-to-peer, and people earn BTRST for doing so. And so those are just kind of a couple of use cases, but the core idea here is anyone can show up and help add value to the network and earn BTRST for doing so. And then, so those are basically how you can earn it. And then the question is like, okay, well, what do you do with it? So a couple of core things. We're going to be enabling bid staking. So what is bid staking? In a competitive environment, you need a way to create trust mechanisms, new trust mechanisms in a decentralized world. And so talent in a competitive situation will be able to actually stake BTRST along with their bid. And that's kind of like a bond, right? So like if you don't deliver according to timeline or according to spec, you can actually lose that stake. That's a good example. And then one of the most important ones is actually governance. So it's a one token, one vote system. Anyone that holds BTRST token can actually propose anything from changes to fee structure to new categories that we go into, and can participate in the governance of the network. And listen, like that matters a lot when you're running your business on these networks. You care quite a bit about the fee structure. You care quite a bit about how the network is governed. So we publish all this. All this is totally transparent. It's both in our white paper on braintrust.com, and also we post posted a couple page kind of token economic design that shows all the allocations. And then we're in about a week or so posting public dashboards. So all this data will be fully transparent and public to the whole world. And we'll show how people can earn, the percentages that have been earned so far, top earners, et cetera. So the idea is put everything out in the open and let everyone see everything that's happening in the network.
Awesome. Yeah, I know we had a few send me a message about your podcast and kind of building in the open. So definitely have some fans here with that.
Cool.
Which is cool. Hey, so I did have a question. Kind of going back to the to your initial kind of raise. Was that like an equity round, or was that like a token, or?
Yeah, I mean, so that's that was maybe that was one of the challenges, right? There is no equity in Braintrust. So we have never raised equity, never will. It simply doesn't even exist in the Braintrust network. The sole unit of ownership and governance and control is the Braintrust token.
Got it. And then so you did kind of mention too, like the kind of the governance, right, of Braintrust.
Yeah.
So is that like, how do you think about kind of managing that and the kind of liquidity of your marketplace? It sounds like those are kind of two unique challenges.
Yeah. So and listen, any marketplace, like one of the core jobs is like clearing supply and demand, right? Clearing the bid and the ask and having enough liquidity. The way that traditional Web2 marketplaces do that is that's like why they essentially subsidize one side. So that's why you need to raise ungodly sums of money from venture capitalists. And then essentially you have investor-owned networks because they own the whole company, because you need to raise so much capital to essentially subsidize one side. What's really unique about Braintrust, I'll give you a good example. All right, so let's just say, Mike, let's say Nestle shows up, right? Nestle shows up and says, hey, we need to find TensorFlow folks. We need 10 TensorFlow people to work on a really interesting AI project. Essentially, the protocol looks at the network and says, hey, we actually have 5 of these people that meet these criteria of geography and skills and rates. What happens is that the whole network gets pinged and says, hey, if you refer TensorFlow people, you'll actually earn 1% of what those people make on the BTRST network paid out in BTRST, right? So then let's say Marvin refers 5 TensorFlow people. Those people come in, they sign up for accounts, they get hired by Nestle. Nestle starts clearing invoices. Our protocol essentially looks at the invoices and said, hey, Nestle just paid a $100,000 invoice. Who referred Nestle? Oh, Maxine referred Nestle. Send Maxine 1% of that $100,000 to her wallet in BTRST, right? Oh, who referred these TensorFlow engineers? Oh, Marvin referred them. Send 1% of what all the billings of those TensorFlow engineers was. And now it's not a one-time payment. It happens automatically, paid out from the protocol in a recurring basis. So you can imagine it's a pretty strong incentive when every single month when invoices get paid, you're essentially earning BTRST for showing up and inviting talent, inviting companies.
Got it. That's super interesting. So I have so many questions myself, but I think we're going to go ahead and jump into the group questions if that sounds good to you. I want to make sure we can get to them. We have quite a few. Hey, Pablo, do you want to jump on?
Sure thing. Hey, Gabe, Pablo here. Hey. Fascinating presentation. I've been following Braintrust for a couple of years. I've been in the similar space of like marketplace for engineers.
Cool.
So this seems like in a way, it seems like an evolution of like community led into like now it's a more centralized and like people actually get something in return, not just like a pat on their backs. Yeah. Is like a one way to look at it or how it took it. So specifically the question that I have is on you said your initial funders, the VC firms took 22% of the tokens.
Over two rounds.
Over 2 rounds. Got it. Is there some sort of like vesting happening, or did they get it right away when they're putting up the money?
Great question. So it's the raise happens on a SAFT TE. which is kind of the instrument that that typically token projects raise. And then those have a 2-year vest from public launch, and we did our public launch on September 1st.
Got it. Yeah. That was really the main thing. And I guess maybe to share some context from the perspective of like, say I was a developer or somebody who I work in the platform, I wonder what the members think of like the investors having like 1/5 now of the ownership of the company, ownership being in this case not equity but like decision making. Like am I okay with having VC firms now own the platform in the sense that they have a majority? Well, not a majority. We're definitely not close to majority, but like, is there a risk that eventually, like, if the VCs like trying to get more of that percentage from some other people, or is like in the white paper you guys already cover all the use cases of like there's never going to be like 50+1 for anybody?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I mean, I think that this is both like the opportunity and also the new, right? And so I think when we think about this, we think about the majority being actually owned and controlled by the users, and that's kind of built into the code and built into the distribution structure, and that's why that's why those things are earned versus bought. Does that make sense? So hey, listen, like, if VCs want to show up and invite a bunch more companies and invite a bunch more talent to the network that start transacting the network, like, that's good for everyone. And so the way that we think about this is it's a model that aligns incentives, right? And so again, if anyone wants to show up, if you guys want to show up and great engineers or great companies want to hire talent, you want to show up and earn BTRST, you might not be a talent transacting on the network, but you are a network participant, and you can earn BTRST, and also you can propose governance ideas of ways you think that the network could improve.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Awesome. So actually, I had a question for you myself. So as far as like the kind of network and the community aspect, do you run like a Discord community or some kind of community like platform?
Yeah. So a couple places, like in the wide world of crypto, typically there's kind of a few places. So we do have Telegram, and then we have Discord. I'll drop a link here in a second. I would say that like Discord seems to be where that's kind of where the most vibrant community is, where governance happens, where a lot of proposals happen, etc. I'll drop a link here. So yes, we use Discord. We used to use Slack for that purpose. And then we just started, I would say, like, outgrowing it, and also needed a bunch more use cases. And so we currently use Discord for a lot of community management.
Got it. Awesome. Thanks. I feel like a lot of us are going to be trying to wrap our heads around the kind of community and the governance aspect.
Yeah.
So cool. Hey, Davey, do you want to jump on?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much, Gabriel, for sharing all of that. It's super interesting. So I have 3 questions all related to the same one. It's like, you talked a lot about Web3. So my question is, how do you see the future of Web2 with all the current marketplaces? Do you think that all owners of current marketplaces, like Web2 style, should already think about implementing a Web3 perspective in it? And do you think is it also technically possible?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we spent a lot of time on this, like in the early days when we were looking at like the categories, right? So it was funny, like when we first started, this was it was an economic model looking for a category, which is a little bit backwards from the way in which you normally like do a startup. So it was actually like whiteboarded all these categories, like looking at everything from like Etsy to ride sharing and insurance and home services and technical talent. And then we actually came up with a kind of a criteria or a matrix that we used to narrow those down. One of the criteria was like, if you're going to be luring people away from an incumbent network with the promise of a token, like, you're not going to do that on Etsy for people crocheting hand mittens, right? Like, it's certainly not in 2018. But like if you do that with software developers, like they get tokens. So timing, I think, matters a lot here. And that's why I think, like, people have like put out really grand ideas around tokenization of huge categories of, mortgage and things like that. And it's like, yes, I think all those things will happen. The challenge is that like none of those transactions are on the blockchain. You have to get all that information onto the blockchain. And so I don't know that those are like the first categories to touch. So I think timing matters here a lot. In terms of like which Web 2 start to migrate into Web 3. But I think at a fundamental level, like if you take a long time horizon, any network that extracts disproportionate rents from their users and does not share value or governance with those users is going to be susceptible to this model. Why? Because the incentives are just so strong. And so what's the next category that happens? I don't know. But I think if you look at it over the next decade, like the marketplaces that are going to grow the fastest and likely be the most valuable are going to be the ones that are user owned and controlled.
Thanks a lot. So related to this, is there not like a big future for actually creators to actually create this environment where you vet people? Because as soon as you don't have those fees, so everyone can go into a network and start selling their own services or whatever. But what happened at the end is you have so much offer, then you will have a need to actually vet people and make sure that the people that you have, they're actually good, because some people will not be qualified at all, right?
Yeah, it's a great question. So like in our particular network, in some networks, that's more important than others. In ours, it's incredibly important. Like we deal with the world's largest enterprises, right? And so we have to actually ensure that the network quality is super high. And so there's a really extensive screening and vetting process that happens both through technology and also through the protocol and also through the community and peer-to-peer vetting. So I think it's about 1%, 1.5% of the people that come in actually get verified and can actually submit bids for these enterprises. I think that over time, there's going to be different attestations and different reputation systems that are going to be developed in Web 3 in the same way that happened in Web 2. I think that's just a matter of time. But in our network, it's very, very important that quality of verified is super high because the nature of the work that's happening.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Those are great questions. Hey, Maxine, do you want to jump on?
Yeah, sure. Huge fan. Love user-owned networks. Wondering your thoughts. I first heard user-owned networks from Jared Lanier, who owns the Future Book, and he did an economic analysis of if Instagram didn't actually have just like 10 or so VC investors that got paid out when they sold to Facebook, but rather if the users of Instagram, based on their contributions to the platform, had an ownership in Instagram, and that valuation was shared among the users. Is what you're working on applicable to the large networks like that as well? Do you think that a social platform could be user owned based on not just that like monetary transactions, but content contributions?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're seeing the early bits of it, right? Like my friend Scott Belsky says, it has this kind of interesting quote, and he says like that like the new things always look like toys, right? And everyone kind of like disregards them. It's like, why would you want to order a black car, right? Like, what? Right? Or like, why would you want to like let somebody sleep on your couch? Like that just seems nuts. Or why would you want to sleep on somebody else's couch? Like that's crazy. That seems like a toy, right? And these have been the dominant business models of the last 20 years. So I think what we're seeing right now is like those early experiments, right? You're seeing early experiments in like think projects like Mirror. You're seeing early examples of like NFT projects and communities that are owned by their communities. So I think these things right now, like to the outside world, they look like toys. And I think that's fine. They kind of fly under the radar for a while, and then all of a sudden feels like they kind of come out of nowhere. And you have, $10 billion networks that are owned and operated by their users. So yeah, I fundamentally believe that the next generation of marketplaces will be owned and operated by their users. And I like that future because it feels more fair and egalitarian. And it feels like it puts the value and the power back into the people that actually deserve it, which are the users, because they're the ones creating the value.
And totally agree. How do you guys calculate the value of Braintrust? Is it still economics, like based on monetary, how much sales are done?
Yeah, so there is, like right now, there is no value to the BTRST token. There was so there is no value to the BTRST token and we don't control exchanges, we don't control when and how that happens. But if and when that happens, those things are market driven, not something we have control over. So
it's a floating, it's not, there's no value, you just accumulate tokens from the 250 million.
For right now, we launched on mainnet. And then, if and when exchanges happen, the market really determines what the token's price could or should be.
Okay. Yeah. And one other question, are you frustrated by any of what's your biggest challenge right now that you have that engine started? Are you happy serving the large enterprise clients and the top 1%? Is that where we're going to stick?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great question. I would say that, so every marketplace flips, right? Like if you're doing it well, like at some point, like you're supply constrained, and then you become demand constrained or something like that. And so we thought that was going to happen like in 3 years from now, and it happened like 8 months ago. And so we saw demand like quadruple, literally like in 3 days. And it flipped for us. And so since then, it's been rapidly scaling up the talent side community to meet the needs of these growing enterprises. Then I don't see that slowing down anytime soon.
Very cool. Do you think you're going to be bigger than Upwork soon?
I can't make any forward-looking statements.
Awesome. Hey, we actually had a question. Someone did send me a question in the community prior to the chat that I want to make sure I could ask. But yeah, they were asking, have you found it challenging, to kind of educate the enterprises, because you have some pretty top enterprises as far as what Braintrust is and kind of the token model, or what is that?
Yeah, it's interesting. Timing matters a lot there, right? So like in the beginning, we didn't even talk about it at all, because it's basically like walking into a wall, right? Or having a door slammed in your face. So like in 2018, nobody cared about that. And we spent 2019 really kind of like building the first version of the network. And then kind of went into invite only beta in 2020. And at the core, like our belief was actually that we wanted people to join and use, a decentralized network without having to install MetaMask, download this like software, buy tokens. Like no enterprise is going to do that, right? They don't want to buy tokens. They don't want to custody them. They don't want any of those things. What they want is access to the best talent around the world. And they want to cut out these like extractive middlemen that have been taking them on a ride for the past 20 years. And so the way we explain it is very, very simple. We say, listen, like, how do we get the best people on the planet that want to run their businesses on Braintrust? Well, we charge them 0% fees, and they get to earn BTRust and participate in governance and control in the network. And that's enough, right? They're like, wow, that's totally different. Oh, and guess what? Like you pay 10% instead of, typically they pay 5x markups if they're working with staffing agencies or things like that. And so like they can hire 5 times as many people that are super high quality, and essentially those people have fully aligned incentives. So I think it's actually a very simple answer to them now. I think we got in. It was like word salad for us. We couldn't even explain it very well when we first started. And then now it's actually it's literally like a 1-sentence answer.
Got it. Cool. So I had a question I was going to ask, and it's like, what does the future look like for Braintrust? I'm not sure if you can answer that. You said a no forward looking kind of statements.
Yeah, I mean, listen, we're just heads down, right? We're
Yeah.
heads down, continuing to build and continuing to grow the community and enable, more enterprises to be able to transact in a trusted way and enable more talent to continue to earn more. I mean, we've had some amazing examples just so far this year. It's like this guy named Kartik, for example. So Kartik, he's a like a software architect. And in the first 9 months of this year, he's earned $212,000 on Braintrust, right? Like, wow, that's crazy, right? And there's tons and tons of those examples. So it's what we're seeing is this kind of unwinding out of traditional corporate jobs where people are having to work a 9 to 5, having to go and stamp a clock, and now people can essentially work, on their own time, doing work they love and actually keeping 100% of the value that they create. And my hope is that, there's thousands more of people like Kartik in front of us.
Awesome. That's a really great story. One of the last kind of questions that I had for you. So, you have some pretty incredible experience, in Web2 and then now in Web3. So kind of like looking back though, and this is all with marketplaces, what are some kind of like key learnings or maybe tips that you'd like to share with us as early stage marketplace founders here?
Let's see. I mean, I think that at a fundamental level, like the job of the marketplace operator is really to reduce friction, right? At a core level is basically looking at any areas where there's friction in bringing these people to transact in a trusted way and looking for ways to remove friction and delight both sides, right? Like that if you do a really, really great job of that, and continue to remove friction for people, like that's the reason that people continue to come back. So I oftentimes like think about focusing on that part first, and that's like what gets the flywheel turning is people's delightful experience, and also like, wow, that was super easy compared to whatever it is, whatever the alternative is. Chances are it's friction laden. And a brutal process. And so if you can remove those things, that's oftentimes like where the delight comes from.
Awesome. That's a great way to wrap things up. So yeah, thanks again for this group chat, man. This is super insightful. And you took us in head first into Web3, so I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
I spend a lot of time on Twitter kind of like talking about these perspectives, talking about specifically this kind of transition between Web2 and Web3, and talk a little bit about marketplaces as well there. So
awesome.
Can I ask one more question?
Yeah, go for it.
How important is it to spend that much time on Twitter educating at your role? Like, how much time do you actually talk about this rather than like develop and get clients?
I would say that for me, I batch it. So I'm not like on there every single day during a bunch of hours, but I do have some, I would say, dedicated writing hours of a couple hours a week where I kind of like just sit down, drink coffee, like just do a deep dive into some concepts or questions that I get asked, and then do a bunch of content creation typically at once. Like my job is not to be on Twitter, right? My job is to help like foment a really incredible community and a global network. And that's part of my job, but I kind of batch the process to be able to ensure that it's not like something that is eating up my whole day.
Yeah, I guess on that note, where can we keep up with you? I guess we need a kind of quick plug to wrap things up.
Yeah, cool. So braintrust.com is the site for Braintrust, and then I'll share my my Twitter handle here. It's Gabe Luna-O on Twitter.
Awesome. Well, this is a great chat. So I feel like we could have actually done a whole other chat on Web2 and your experience there, but this is great to jump into Web3. So once again, appreciate it. And thanks everyone for the great questions.
Absolutely, guys.
Awesome.
Take good care, huh? Bye-bye.